My daughter-in-law handed me that bottle of Cabernet as if she were presenting the crown jewels. And I should have known right then that something wasn't right. The very next day, she called to ask how the wine was. And when I told her I'd given it to her mother, the silence on the line stretched so long I honestly thought the call had dropped. If you're watching this, go ahead and subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Eleanor Williams, but everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 67 years old, a widow for 3 years now, and I've always prided myself on being good at reading people. Turns out, I'd been reading my daughter-in-law, Sophie, completely wrong for the past 5 years. It all started on March 15th, my birthday. Sophie had been unusually attentive that week, calling me twice and asking what I wanted. I told her nothing fancy, just having the family together. But Sophie insisted on bringing something special. She showed up at my ranch house carrying a perfectly wrapped wine bottle and wearing a smile that felt just a little too bright. "Happy birthday, Ellie," she said cheerfully. "I picked this out especially for you." The bottle itself was stunning, deep red wax seal, an elegant label. "It probably cost more than my weekly groceries, Sophie." "This is too much," I told her. "Nothing's too much for my favorite mother-in-law," she replied. My son Michael came out of the kitchen just then. "What's too much?" he asked. "Your wife bought me wine that costs more than my car payment," I said. Michael laughed. "Mom, you paid off that car 3 years ago." The rest of the evening went smoothly. Dinner, Michael telling stories, Sophie seeming relaxed. But I couldn't help noticing that she kept glancing at the wine bottle sitting on my counter. Every time I offered to open it, she quickly suggested we save it. "It's too good to rush," she said. "You should savor it when you can really appreciate it." That should have been my first clue. After they left, I stood there staring at the bottle. Something about Sophie's insistence didn't sit right with me. I'd always thought of her as calculating everything she did had a purpose behind it. The next morning, I thought about Helen Carter, Sophie's mother. Despite the rocky marriage between our kids, Helen and I had managed to keep a warm friendship. She'd recently mentioned feeling low after her divorce. I figured a nice bottle of wine might lift her spirits. I called Helen around noon. "I have a birthday gift to share," I told her. "Sophie brought me a gorgeous bottle of wine, but you know me and alcohol. I thought you might enjoy it more." "Oh, Ellie, that's so thoughtful," Helen said, her voice brightening. "I'd love that." When Helen arrived, I handed her the bottle and watched her face light up. "This is beautiful wine," she said. "Sophie has excellent taste." After she left, I busied myself around the house. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made some kind of mistake. Still, what kind of mistake could giving away wine possibly be? At 6:30 that evening, the phone rang. Sophie's name flashed on the caller ID. "Hello, sweetheart." "Hi, Ellie," she said. And there was something strained in her voice. "Just checking on you. How are you feeling?" "Wonderful, thank you. Yesterday was lovely." "Good." She paused. "So how was the wine?" I blinked. "The wine? Oh, I haven't opened it." Another pause. Longer this time. "You haven't opened it?" "No, honey. Actually, I gave it to your mother. You know how I am with alcohol, and Helen's been so down since the divorce." The silence that followed was so complete I checked my phone screen. "Sophie, are you there? You gave it to my mother?" Her voice had changed higher, tight, almost panicked. "Yes, is that a problem?" "You did what?" The words burst out so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. In 5 years, I'd never heard Sophie raise her voice. She was always controlled, always composed. "Sophie, what's wrong?" "It's just wine. It's not just..." She stopped abruptly, breathing hard. "When did you give it to her?" "This afternoon." She was thrilled. "Why are you so upset?" "I'm not upset," she said quickly, though her voice was shaking. "I just wanted you to enjoy it." "That's sweet, but Helen will appreciate it too. She said she's opening it tonight." The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Then the line went dead. Something was very wrong with that wine. I tried calling Sophie back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I called Michael. His phone was off too. That's when real panic set in. After raising a child alone, I'd developed a strong sense for the difference between paranoia and genuine danger, and every instinct I had was screaming. I sat at my kitchen table replaying everything, Sophie insisting I save the wine, the way she kept watching it, her questions about how I felt, her immediate call the next day, and finally the horrifying possibility that pushed its way to the front of my mind. What if something was wrong with that wine? Something that was never meant to be there? I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. Helen lived about 20 minutes away in a small apartment complex. I don't think I've ever driven so carefully and so frantically at the same time. My heart was pounding by the time I knocked on her door. Helen answered with a smile and flushed cheeks. "Ellie, what a surprise," she said. "I was just having a glass of that wonderful wine." Relief washed over me. She was fine standing there, talking, smiling. "How are you feeling?" I asked, studying her face closely. "Much better than I've felt in weeks," she said, waving me inside. "I don't know what was in that wine, but it's like magic. I feel so relaxed." Those words sent a chill straight down my spine. "What do you mean? What was in that wine?" I asked. Helen laughed, but the sound was slightly off. "Some wines just make you feel different. This one makes me feel floaty. Like all my worries have melted away." I followed her into the living room. The wine bottle sat on the coffee table, about a third of it gone. Helen's movements were a little unsteady. "Helen, how much have you had?" I asked. "Just 2 glasses," she said, settling onto the couch with a dreamy look on her face. "But I feel like I've had a whole bottle. It's the strangest thing." My mouth went dry. "Strange how?" "Well, I opened it around 5. Had my first glass with dinner. It tasted bitter, but expensive wine sometimes does. Then I had another glass about an hour ago, and that's when everything started feeling soft." I sat across from her, forcing my voice to stay calm. "When you say soft, what exactly do you mean?" She waved her hand vaguely. "Like I'm floating. Like everything's far away." I was feeling so sad about Richard, the divorce, starting over at 64. But now I don't care. That wasn't normal. Wine might relax you, but it didn't make you feel like you were floating after 2 glasses, Helen. "Listen carefully," I said. "How are you feeling physically? Any nausea, dizziness, problems with your vision?" She thought for a long moment, the slow deliberation of someone whose thinking wasn't quite right. "A little dizzy. My mouth feels funny dry, but also tingly." I was already pulling out my phone. "We're going to the hospital." "Hospital?" Helen looked confused. "Why, I feel fine. Better than fine. That's exactly why we're going." At the emergency room, a tired-looking doctor about my son's age introduced herself as Dr. Martinez. She listened with professional skepticism as she reviewed Helen's vitals. "So," she said, "you think someone tampered with the wine?" "I know how it sounds," I replied. But my daughter-in-law's reaction when I told her I'd given the wine away was extreme. Double quotes. Helen, now pale and confused on the examination table, spoke up. "I do feel strange. Not sick exactly, but not right." Dr. Martinez nodded. "We'll run some tests, blood work, urine analysis. If there's something in her system that shouldn't be, we'll find it." While we waited, I tried calling Michael. This time, he answered. "Mom? Sophie said you called, but she couldn't reach you back." "Michael, listen carefully," I said. "Where is Sophie right now?" "She's in the bathroom." "Why, what's wrong?" "I gave that wine to Helen, and now Helen is in the emergency room." There was silence on the line. Shock, not guilt. "What happened?" he finally asked. "Is Helen okay?" "I don't know yet." "But Michael." Sophie's reaction when I told her about the wine was like I'd just said someone was about to drink poison. "Mom, that's a serious accusation." "I know. But ask yourself, what innocent reason could Sophie have for reacting like that?" "Let me talk to her," he said. "I'll call you back." 2 hours later, Dr. Martinez returned with the test results. Her voice quiet and serious. "Your friend has rohypnol in her system," she said. "It's commonly known as a day trip drug, though it's used for other purposes too. It causes memory loss, disorientation, and in higher doses, it can be fatal." The room spun. "How much did she have?" "Not a life-threatening amount, thankfully," she replied. "But enough to cause significant impairment. If she'd consumed the entire bottle." She shook her head. "You did the right thing bringing her in." Helen, more alert now thanks to her fluids, looked at me with frightened eyes. "Someone tried to drug me, not you," I said softly, the horrible truth settling over me. The drive home at 2 in the morning was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Helen stayed overnight for observation. The drug was leaving her system, but the knowledge of what could have happened wasn't leaving mine. Someone had tried to drug me. My daughter-in-law, the woman who married my son, the woman who'd sat at my dinner table and called me mom for 5 years. But why? I realized I didn't really know Sophie at all. I knew the version she presented to family, but who was she when we weren't watching? My house felt different when I walked through the front door. I double-checked every lock and pulled all the curtains shut. If Sophie was capable of drugging wine meant for me, what else was she capable of? I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. I made some tea and sat at the kitchen table. That's when I noticed my purse sitting on the counter, slightly open. I always closed my purse completely, always, but the zipper was open about 2 inches. My wallet visible inside. My hands shook as I checked the contents. Everything looked like it was there until I counted the bills, $63. I clearly remembered having 80 when I'd left for Helen's. $17 was missing. Someone had been in my house, gone through my purse, and taken my money. The only people who had a key besides me were Michael and Sophie. I went through every room, looking for anything else that seemed off. That's when I found it in my bedroom. My jewelry box had been shifted slightly. The small drawer where I kept my most valuable pieces was cracked open. My grandmother's wedding ring was gone. It was the only thing of real value I owned besides my house. I sank down onto my bed as the full weight of it hit me. Sophie hadn't just tried to drug me. She'd come into my house while I was at the hospital and stolen from me. And unless this was the first time, which I doubted, I needed to know how far it went. I spent the next 3 hours going through everything I owned. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, things had been disappearing: a silver picture frame, a set of antique spoons, a $50 savings bond from my desk drawer. I'd been blaming my aging memory. Now I knew the truth. Sophie had been systematically stealing from me for months. At 7 in the morning, my phone rang. Michael's name lit up the screen. "Mom, I've been up all night thinking about what you said," he told me. "And Sophie's been acting strange lately, secretive, going out more, staying out late. When I ask where she's been, she gets defensive." "Michael," I said, "there's something else you need to know." I told him about the missing money, the jewelry, and the other items that had vanished. With every new detail, the silence on his end grew heavier. "I can't believe this," he finally said. "I can't believe Sophie would do this." "But the wine, Mom, that's attempted poisoning. We have to call the police." "I know we do," I said. "But first, I need to understand why. What possible reason could Sophie have for wanting to drug me?" "I don't know," he said. "But I'm going to find out." An hour later, Michael was standing at my door. He looked like he hadn't slept, hair rumpled, eyes red and exhausted. Sophie stood behind him, and the moment I saw her, my stomach tightened. She looked exactly as she always did, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, a crisp white blouse, but something about her eyes was different. There was a hardness there I'd never noticed before. "Hello, Ellie," she said calmly. "Michael says there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the wine." "Misunderstanding?" I repeated slowly. "Is that what we're calling attempted drugging now?" For just a split second, her composure cracked. Something ugly flashed across her face before she smoothed it away. "I think there's been a mistake," she said. "Maybe the wine was contaminated somehow, Sophie," I said quietly but firmly. "They found rohypnol in Helen's blood. That doesn't happen by accident." She stared at me for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Then, to my shock, she smiled. "You're absolutely right," she said. "It doesn't happen by accident." Michael snapped his head toward her. "Sophie, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your mother is smarter than I gave her credit for." She moved into my armchair and sat down like she owned the place. "Not quite smart enough to drink the wine herself, though." The casual way she said it sent ice through my veins. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you want to drug me?" Sophie tilted her head, studying me like I was some kind of experiment. "Do you really want to know, Ellie? Because once I tell you, there's no going back to pretending we're one big happy family." I looked at my son. He was staring at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. "Yes," I said. "I want to know." Sophie reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, placing it carefully on my coffee table the same careful way she'd presented the wine bottle. "This," she said simply, "is why." I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of legal documents, insurance forms, bank statements, and right on top, a life insurance policy with my name on it. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "From your desk drawer," she replied. "The same place you keep your savings bonds. Or used to, anyway." Michael leaned over my shoulder. "I don't understand. What does Mom's life insurance have to do with anything?" Sophie smiled at him like he was slow. "Your mother made you the beneficiary, Michael. $500,000. I blinked. "It's not 500,000. It's 50,000. "Not anymore," Sophie said, pulling out another document. "6 months ago, you increased your coverage. Don't you remember? I helped you with the paperwork." The memory came rushing back. Sophie sitting at my table, explaining insurance updates, pointing to where I needed to sign. I'd trusted her completely. I hadn't read the fine print. "You forged my signature," I said slowly. "I witnessed your signature," Sophie corrected. "On a policy increase you requested. There's a recording of the phone call with the insurance company." My blood turned to ice. "You called them pretending to be me." "I called them as you," she said. "We sound very similar on the phone." Her smile sharpened. "The increase was approved. The premiums are automatically deducted from your checking account," Sophie continued. "Everything is perfectly legal." Michael stared down at the documents like they might suddenly attack him. "Sophie," he said slowly, "you increased my mother's life insurance without her knowledge." "I increased it with her knowledge," Sophie replied calmly. She just didn't understand what she was agreeing to. Then she smiled slightly. "But that's not even the best part." She pulled out one more document, and the moment I saw it, my heart stopped. "You also signed a new will," Sophie said. "A very simple will that leaves everything to Michael: your house, your savings, and of course, The insurance money, I never signed a new will, I said. You signed paperwork updating your beneficiary information, she corrected. The will was attached to the back. You didn't read all the way through, and suddenly, I remembered that day. Sophie had come over with what she called routine financial updates. I'd been distracted, rushing to get ready for a doctor's appointment. I'd signed where she told me to sign, trusting my daughter-in-law. But that still doesn't explain the rohypnol, Michael said, his voice hollow. Sophie turned to him with what looked like genuine affection, which somehow made it worse. Oh, honey, you're really not seeing the big picture. Then explain it to me. Your mother has $500,000 in life insurance. This house is worth at least $200,000. She has savings, bonds, and a small pension. All together, we're looking at around $750,000. The room went quiet except for the ticking of my old clock. We're drowning in debt, Michael. Sophie continued. Your business expansion. The new house? My credit cards. We owe nearly $300,000 and the payments are killing us. So you decided to kill me instead, I said quietly. Sophie shook her head. Nothing so dramatic. The rohypnol was only meant to make you confused and disoriented. Maybe you'd fall down the stairs. Maybe you'd wander outside in your nightgown and catch pneumonia. Maybe you'd have what looked like a stroke. You wanted it to look like an accident. I wanted it to be over quickly for all of us. Her voice was gentle, almost loving. You're 67 years old, Ellie. You live alone. You don't really have a purpose anymore. You're just existing, not living. This way, you'd go peacefully. And Michael and I could finally build the life we've been working toward. Michael shot to his feet so fast his chair crashed to the floor. Are you insane? He shouted. You're talking about murdering my mother. I'm talking about solving all our problems with one simple solution. She's my mother. For a moment, Sophie's mask slipped again, revealing something cold underneath. She's an obstacle. Michael, she said flatly. And obstacles get removed. That was when I understood something vital about my daughter-in-law. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't acting out of panic or desperation. She was a predator, methodical, patient. And planning this for months. The small thefts, I said. Those were test runs. Sophie nodded, almost impressed. Very good. I needed to see how observant you were. How quickly you'd notice things disappearing. You failed that test spectacularly, and if I'd drunk the wine last night, I said, I would have felt relaxed at first. Then confused. I might have called Michael to say I wasn't feeling well. By the time anyone checked on me, I'd have been unconscious or dead if I'd finished the bottle. Michael began pacing, running his hands through his hair. This is insane, Sophie. This is my mother. I know you love her, Sophie said softly. But love doesn't pay our mortgage, honey. Love doesn't get creditors off our backs. Love doesn't buy us the life we deserve. I looked at the woman who had sat at my table, helped me with crossword puzzles, and called me mom for 5 years and realized she was a complete stranger. What made you think I wouldn't fight back? I asked. Sophie blinked, clearly never having considered that possibility. Fight back? How? She scoffed. You're a 67-year-old widow with no money and no power. What could you possibly do to me? I smiled. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of my old self return. Let's find out. The silence that followed stretched so long I could hear the refrigerator humming. Sophie studied my face, trying to decide whether I was bluffing. Michael had stopped pacing and was staring at both of us. Let's be practical, Ellie. Sophie said at last, her patronizing tone one I now recognized. What exactly do you think you can do? Call the police? Tell them that you gave away a bottle of wine and your friend got sick? I could tell them about the rohypnol, I said. Sophie shook her head. Which could have come from anywhere. Helen's been depressed about her divorce. Maybe she was taking sleeping pills and forgot. Maybe she mixed alcohol with medication. These things happen with older people. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a slap. Sophie was explaining just how easily she could paint me as a confused old woman, whose ramblings no one would take seriously. I could tell them about the forged insurance documents. I said. Sophie shook her head again. Nothing was forged, Sophie said smoothly. You signed everything. There are witnesses, recordings, and a paper trail showing that you requested all of these changes. I was very thorough. Michael finally found his voice. Sophie, stop. Just stop talking. He turned to me, his face drained of color. Mom, we're calling the police right now. No, I said quietly. We're not. Both of them stared at me. Not yet, I continued. Sophie is right about one thing. I don't have enough evidence to prove what she intended to do. Sophie's smile crept back. Finally. Some sense. But here's what you've forgotten, sweetheart, I said, standing up and walking into my kitchen. I've been managing my own affairs for 3 years since my husband died. And that means I've learned a few things about protecting myself. I opened my junk drawer and pulled out a small digital recording device. This entire conversation has been recorded. I held it up and watched all the color drain from Sophie's face, including your confession to increasing my life insurance without my knowledge, forging my will, stealing from me for months, and attempting to drug me with the intention of causing my death. You can't use that. Sophie snapped. It's illegal to record someone without their consent. Actually, I said calmly, in this state, only one party needs to consent to the recording. That would be me. I looked up the recording laws after my husband died, and this was recorded in my own home, where I have every right to record conversations. Michael stared at the device like it was a miracle. Moms, how did you? I turned it on when I saw Sophie reach for that folder, I said. Call it intuition. Or call it the wisdom that comes from living 67 years and learning to recognize a snake when you see one. Sophie's composure was unraveling now. Ellie, you don't understand the pressure we've been under, she said. The debt, the stress. I understand that you decided my life was worth less than your credit card bills. That's not, I never meant for it to go this far, she said quickly. It started small, just borrowing a few dollars here and there, taking things I thought you wouldn't miss. But the debt kept growing and I saw an opportunity to solve everything at once, by killing me. I said, by helping me transition peacefully. You've been so lonely since your husband died, Sophie said softly. You've said yourself that you feel like you're just going through the motions. I stared at her, stunned by her ability to reframe attempted murder as compassion. And you decided to help me transition while conveniently solving all your financial problems. The money was never the point, she insisted. It was just a bonus. Even Michael wasn't buying that. Sophie, stop, he said, please. Just stop talking. But she was in full damage control mode now. Michael, you have to understand. I did this for us. For our future. Your mother is old. She's alone. She's not really living anymore. We could have used that money to build something beautiful together. She's my mother, Michael said, his voice breaking. And I'm your wife, Sophie shot back. I'm the mother of your future children. I'm the person you're supposed to spend the rest of your life with. Doesn't that count for something? I watched my son struggle with the impossible choice in front of him. Sophie was right about one thing: he did love her. Even now, part of him was searching for a way to make this work. Michael, I said gently. You know what has to happen now? He nodded slowly. I know. Sophie must have seen something change in his expression, because she suddenly stood up and grabbed her purse. I think I should go, she said. We can talk about this later when everyone's had time to process. No, Michael said firmly. You're not going anywhere, Michael. You can't seriously be thinking of choosing her over me. I'm choosing right over wrong, he said. And what you planned to do is wrong. It's evil. Sophie's face hardened. Fine, she said. But before you make any permanent decisions, you might want to think about what calling the police will mean for your precious mother. What do you mean? Michael asked. I mean, Ellie isn't as innocent in all this as she's pretending to be. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Sophie's smile returned sharp and vicious. Tell him about the prescription pills, Ellie. Tell him about the ones you've been saving up. Michael turned to me, confusion written all over his face. What prescription pills? After my husband died, I'd fallen into a deep depression. My doctor had prescribed sleeping pills and anxiety medication. When I started feeling better, I stopped taking them regularly, but I kept the leftovers, just in case. It's not what she's implying, I said quickly, isn't it? Sophie purred. Tell him how many sleeping pills you've been hoarding in your medicine cabinet. Tell him about the night last month when you told me you sometimes thought about taking them all at once. That was a moment of weakness, I said. I would never what? Sophie pressed. Kill yourself. But you'd already been thinking about it, hadn't you? Sophie pressed. The Rohypnol would have just helped you along with something you were already considering. She had taken my darkest moment and twisted it into justification for her actions. You're sick, Michael said to her. But I could see doubt beginning to creep into his eyes. I'm practical, Sophie replied coolly. And now we all know where we stand. I looked at the woman who had eaten at my table, helped me hang Christmas decorations, and smiled through family dinners, and realized she had never seen me as a person at all. I had always just been a problem to solve. There's something else you should know, I said to Michael. About the timing. Sophie's head snapped toward me, her confidence giving way to weariness. 2 weeks ago, I mentioned to Helen that I was thinking about updating my will. I never told you that, Sophie. But someone called my lawyer's office last week asking about my will status. Someone pretending to be me. That's not, Sophie started. The lawyer's secretary recognized it wasn't my voice, I continued. She called me to confirm. I gave a grim smile. Looks like you got nervous that I might change my will before you could carry out your plan. Michael stared at Sophie like he'd never seen her before. You've been monitoring my mom's legal affairs? I've been protecting our interests, Sophie snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. You're too soft, Michael. Too sentimental. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up my landline phone. What are you doing? Sophie demanded. I'm calling the police. I dialed 911 and waited. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report an attempted murder and grand theft, I said clearly, locking eyes with Sophie. My daughter-in-law has been stealing from me for months and tried to kill me last night. By putting rohypnol in a bottle of wine, Sophie lunged toward me, trying to grab the phone, but Michael caught her arms. Mum, are you in immediate danger? The dispatcher asked. Yes, I said, watching Sophie struggle against Michael's grip. The person who tried to kill me is in my house right now. Units are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Sophie stopped struggling and stared at me with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've just done, she hissed. I've just saved my own life, I replied. Through the window, I could see the flashing lights of police cars pulling into my driveway. The police are going to find your fingerprints on that wine bottle, I continued calmly. They'll trace the rohypnol. They'll examine every document you forged. And then they'll put you in prison for a very long time. The police were knocking at my door now. And me? I said, the old woman you thought would be so easy to kill? I'm going to live for a very long time. Long enough to make sure you never get out of prison. I opened the door and let justice walk in. The next few hours were a blur. Police officers, evidence collection, and statements. Detective Sarah Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, treated my recording device like a priceless artifact. Mrs. Williams, she said, sealing it in an evidence bag, this recording is incredibly valuable. Combined with the rohypnol found in Mrs. Carter's system and the forged documents, we have a very solid case. Sophie sat handcuffed in my living room, silent. Her perfect composure finally shattered. The woman who had tried to kill me for money now looked exactly like what she was, a common criminal who'd been caught. Fingerprint analysis will take a few days, Detective Morrison continued. But I'm confident we'll find Sophie's prints on the wine bottle. She wasn't wearing gloves, was she? No, I said. She presented it like a gift. Made a whole show of it. Michael sat across the room looking like his world had collapsed, which I suppose it had. The woman he loved and trusted had turned out to be a calculating predator who married him for money. Mom, he said quietly, I'm so sorry. I should have seen the signs. I should have protected you, honey, I said gently. She fooled me too. And I've been around a lot longer than you have. Sophie finally spoke, her voice sharp with bitterness. Don't act like the victim here, Ellie. You've been nothing but a burden to Michael for years. At least I was trying to solve the problem. Detective Morrison raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, I'd advise you to stop speaking without an attorney present. Why? Sophie laughed harshly. What's the worst that could happen? I'm already going to prison for attempted murder. Might as well tell everyone exactly what I think of this whole charade. That was when I realized Sophie wasn't just evil, she was stupid. Smart enough to plan a murder. Too stupid to know when to keep her mouth shut. You know what the funny thing is? Sophie went on, completely ignoring Detective Morrison's warning look. I almost succeeded. If you hadn't given that wine to Helen, you'd be dead right now. And Michael and I would be planning your funeral while calculating how much money we'd inherit. Michael made a sound like he'd been punched in the gut. Sophie, stop, please. Why should I stop? She snapped. It's the truth. Your precious mother has been living on borrowed time anyway. I just tried to speed up the process. Detective Morrison was writing furiously. Every word Sophie said was digging her grave deeper. Ma'am, the detective said sharply. You are confessing to premeditated murder. Are you sure you don't want to wait for a lawyer? Sophie shrugged. What's the point? Ellie has that recording. You have the evidence. I'm not stupid enough to think I can get out of this, actually, I thought. You're exactly that stupid, but I kept my mouth shut and let her keep talking. The only thing I regret, Sophie said, staring straight at me, is that you're still alive. And in that moment, I knew Sophie had just guaranteed herself a life sentence. 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom watching Sophie's trial unfold with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally seen justice served. The prosecutor, a brilliant woman named Amanda Chen, had built an airtight case using my recording, the rohypnol evidence, and Sophie's own confession. But the real shock came when Detective Morrison took the stand to present additional evidence uncovered during the investigation. We discovered that Mrs. Sophie Williams had been researching rohypnol for over 6 months. Detective Morrison testified. Her browser history includes searches for how much rohypnol is fatal, rohypnol detection time, and how to make a death look accidental. The jury looked horrified. Sophie sat at the defense table, finally looking as terrified as she should have been. We also discovered that this was not her first attempt, Detective Morrison continued. 2 months before the wine incident, Mrs. Williams purchased prescription sleep aids using a fake name. Security cameras show her paying cash. My blood ran cold. What were those pills for? We believe she intended to crush them into your food or drink, the detective said, but later decided rohypnol would be more reliable. So Sophie hadn't been planning to kill me for weeks. She'd been planning it for months. The woman who sat at my dinner table, helped me with grocery lists, and smiled sweetly at family gatherings had been plotting my murder the entire time. Amanda Chen approached the witness stand again. Detective Morrison, did your investigation uncover any other victims? Yes, the detective replied. We discovered that Mrs. Williams had been systematically stealing from elderly clients at the insurance agency where she worked part-time. Over the past 2 years, she stole approximately $50,000 from multiple clients. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I hadn't even known Sophie had a job, let alone one that gave her access to other people's money. We also found evidence that she forged documents for other family members. Detective Morrison added, her own mother's will had been altered to leave everything to Sophie instead of her brother. I looked over at Helen in the gallery. Her face was white with shock. Sophie hadn't just tried to kill me. She'd been stealing from her own mother. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand with my head held high. Sophie's defense attorney, a tired-looking public defender, tried to paint me as a confused elderly woman who had misunderstood Sophie's intentions. Mrs. Williams, he asked, isn't it true you've suffered from depression since your husband died? Yes, I answered calmly. And isn't it true you've contemplated suicide? I looked directly at the jury. I had a few dark moments after my husband died, but contemplating something and planning it are two very different things. I never tried to hurt myself, he pressed on. But you did have a large quantity of sleeping pills in your possession. I had leftover medication from a difficult period in my life, I said. I kept them because throwing away prescription drugs felt wasteful. I never used them to harm myself or anyone else. Unlike your client, who put rohypnol in wine meant for me, the attorney frowned. Mrs. Williams, isn't it possible my client was simply trying to help you find peace? I smiled. If your client wanted to help me find peace, I said, she could have suggested therapy, grief counseling, or any number of helpful resources. She didn't need to drug my wine, forge my will, and steal my money. That isn't helping someone find peace, I continued. That's murder for profit. The courtroom fell completely silent, and for the record, I added, I found plenty of peace now that your client is behind bars exactly where she belongs. The day of Sophie's sentencing, the courtroom was packed. Helen sat beside me, having finally recovered from the shock of discovering her daughter's true nature. Michael sat on my other side, looking far older than his 35 years. Judge Patricia Hawkins, a stern woman in her 60s, presided over the room. She looked like someone who had seen enough criminals in her career to have very little patience left for someone like Sophie. Mrs. Sophie Williams. Judge Hawkins began. You have been found guilty of first-degree attempted murder, multiple counts of fraud, elder abuse, and theft. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything you wish to say? Sophie stood slowly. For a brief moment, I thought she might finally show remorse. I was wrong, Your Honor, Sophie said. I believe the prosecution has blown this entire situation out of proportion. Yes, I made some poor decisions, but my intentions were never malicious. I was simply trying to solve financial problems that were affecting my family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even now, staring down a life sentence, Sophie was still trying to minimize what she had done. I also believe Mrs. Eleanor Williams has been vindictive in her pursuit of this case. Sophie continued. She's an elderly woman living alone with no real purpose in life. I was actually trying to help her by. That's enough, Judge Hawkins cut in sharply. Mrs. Williams. What you've just said shows me that you have absolutely no remorse for your crimes. You attempted to murder an innocent woman for financial gain. You forged legal documents, stole money, and demonstrated a complete disregard for human life. Sophie's face drained of color. Furthermore, Judge Hawkins continued, your ongoing attempts to justify your actions show that you pose a significant danger to society. You've shown no potential for rehabilitation and no understanding of the severity of your crimes. She glanced down at the papers in front of her. Mrs. Sophie Williams, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the attempted murder charge. In addition, you will serve 25 years for fraud and theft to run concurrently. You will also be required to pay restitution to all of your victims, including Mrs. Eleanor Williams and the clients you stole from at the insurance agency. Sophie collapsed into her chair as if her strings had been cut. Furthermore, Judge Hawkins added, I am recommending placement in maximum security for the safety of other inmates and staff. Your callous disregard for human life makes you a danger even within the prison system. As the bailiff led Sophie away in shackles, she turned and looked at me one last time. Her face was twisted with pure hatred and rage. This isn't over. Ellie, she mouthed. I smiled and mouthed back. Yes, it is, for the first time in months. I felt completely safe 6 months after Sophie's sentencing. I was sitting on my back porch enjoying my morning coffee when Michael's car pulled into the driveway. He'd been visiting every Sunday since the trial ended. And little by little, we'd rebuilt our relationship. Morning. Mom, he called out, carrying a bakery box and a bouquet of flowers. Those flowers are beautiful. Honey, I said, smiling, but it's not my birthday, Michael grinned. I know, they're congratulations flowers. Congratulations for what? For being the bravest woman I know, he said. And for saving both our lives. I raised an eyebrow. Both our lives? Michael sat down in the chair beside me and set the flowers on the table. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what would have happened if Sophie's plan had worked. If you drunk that wine and died, that's a dark thought for such a beautiful morning. It is. He agreed. But it's an important one. Because I realized Sophie wouldn't have stopped with killing you. Once she got away with murder, once she had all that money, what would have stopped her from deciding I was an obstacle to? A chill ran through me, but I couldn't deny the logic. Sophie had shown no remorse, no empathy, and no limits to what she'd do for money. She married me for my earning potential, Michael continued. But she would have inherited everything from you, which would have made me unnecessary. How long before she decided that a grieving widower with a large life insurance policy was her next target? Don't think about that, honey, I said softly. It didn't happen. It didn't happen because you were smart enough to give that wine away. Because you were brave enough to fight back. Because you recorded her confession and called the police. Michael reached over and squeezed my hand. You didn't just save your own life. Mom, you saved mine too. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the birds flutter around the feeder. My life had changed dramatically since the night Sophie brought that bottle of wine. I'd installed a security system, changed all my locks, and started taking self-defense classes at the community center. But more importantly, I had reclaimed my sense of self. I was no longer just a lonely widow drifting along the edges of other people's lives. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had faced down a killer and won. There's something else, Michael said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. The insurance company finished their investigation. They're paying you compensation for Sophie's fraud. I opened the envelope and stared at the check. Inside, $50,000. They said it's for emotional distress and the fraudulent policy changes Sophie made, Michael explained. It's yours. Free and clear. I looked at that check and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Financial security. Not wealth, but enough to know I'd be okay no matter what happened. You know what I'm going to do with this? I asked. What? I'm going to take that cruise I've always wanted. The one to Alaska your father and I talked about for years but never took, Michael smiled. That sounds perfect, Mom, and when I come back, I continued, I'm going to volunteer at the district attorney's office. They asked if I'd be willing to help other elderly victims of financial abuse. Apparently, my case has become something of a legend. The woman who recorded her own daughter-in-law's murder confession, Michael said proudly. I love it. As we sat there planning my new future, something finally settled in my heart. Sophie had tried to end my life, but instead, she had given me a reason to start living again. 1 year after Sophie's sentencing, I stood at a podium in the community center, facing a packed room of seniors and their families. The local police department had asked me to speak about elder abuse prevention, and every seat was filled. My name is Eleanor Williams, I began, and I'm here to tell you how my daughter-in-law tried to murder me for insurance money, and how I made sure she'll spend the rest of her life in prison. The room fell completely silent. A year ago, I believed I was just a lonely widow living on a fixed income with no real purpose. I let other people make decisions for me. I trusted without asking questions. I made myself vulnerable because I didn't think I had any power. I paused and looked out at the faces in front of me. Many of them looked exactly like I had a year earlier, tired, resigned, invisible. But here's what I learned, I said. Age doesn't make you powerless. Being alone doesn't make you defenseless. And being trusting doesn't mean you have to be a victim. I told them about the wine, about the recording device, about the fear and the courage it took to call the police. I talked about asking questions, protecting financial information, listening to that quiet voice inside that tells you something isn't right. The most important thing I can tell you, I concluded, is this: it's never too late to fight back. It's never too late to protect yourself. And it's never too late to start living the life you deserve. The applause was thunderous afterward. Dozens of people came up to thank me, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. An elderly man named Frank pulled me aside. Mrs. Williams, my grandson has been pressuring me to change my will. After hearing your story, I think I need to ask some harder questions. Trust your instincts, Frank, I told him, and document everything. A woman named Dorothy hugged me, tears in her eyes. My daughter-in-law has been borrowing money from me for months. I thought I was helping, but now I wonder. You're not responsible for your adult children's financial problems, I said gently. And borrowing without permission isn't borrowing, it's stealing. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The frightened, lonely woman who had given away a bottle of wine was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than I'd ever been. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Saw the news coverage of your speech online. You looked amazing. Dad would be so proud. He was right. My husband would have been proud of the woman I had become. But more than that, I was proud of myself. I pulled into my driveway and noticed a police car parked across the street. Detective Morrison rolled down her window and waved. Just doing a routine check, she said. Mrs. Williams, how are you doing? I'm doing wonderfully, Detective. How's Sophie adjusting to prison life? Detective Morrison grinned. Let's just say she's learning there are consequences for her actions. Word is, the other inmates aren't too fond of people who try to murder elderly family members. I smiled. I imagine not. As I walked into my house, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes with justice served and a life well lived. Sophie had tried to make me a victim instead. She made me a survivor. And survivors, I'd learned, are far more dangerous than victims. That night, sitting on my porch with a glass of wine when I bought and opened myself, I raised a quiet toast. To the future. To new adventures. To new purpose. And to the unshakable truth that Eleanor Williams was nobody's victim. The wine tasted like victory. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.